This is your before and after story. Prepare for an incredible career in nursing. At Southeastern College, experience expert hands-on training. Learn real-world skills in our professional lab and simulated settings. And train for opportunities as a practical nurse, registered nurse, or career advancement with our RN to BSN program. At Southeastern College, your future is bright. Visit sec.edu to get started.
Hi, welcome to Switching Mindsets. This is Anuradha, and today I'm speaking to Leigh Branham, author of 4 books, including the best-selling, or the most popular, I should say, The 7 Hidden Reasons Employees Leave, How to Recognize the Subtle Signs and Act Before It's Too Late. Leigh is also a career transition coach and organizational consultant and helps companies better understand the root causes of employee turnover and disengagement. He's the founder and managing principal of Keeping the People, a talent management and consulting firm. So, hi, Leigh.
Hi, how are you, Anna?
I'm great, and thank you again for coming on my podcast. So, to jump right into it, your book, the first edition came out, I think, almost 20 years ago.
That's right.
There was a revised edition later, I think 10 years later. So, do you think all of it still holds good in today's day and age? And do you think that anything has changed right now?
Well, I think a lot has changed as a result of the pandemic. Um, the pandemic gave employees a taste of what it was like to work at home, and they really liked it. And it also gave them time and with a little bit of cash in the United States, at least, to reflect on what they really wanted out of the workplace. So their expectations of more leisure time and more caring company that cares about their well-being, that has changed, and especially among Generation X. I'm sorry, Generation Z, the people who have come along after the millennials. So yes, it's recreated higher expectations in terms of well-being, and people are more well, they're less forgiving of companies in terms of how do they allow me to have more leisure time, and they're demanding more of companies in terms of how it feels to work there. So I think that pressure is good, uh, for that to be that pressure to be on companies and to be on senior leaders, especially. And
Absolutely, you're right. It's the same in India as well, because I mean, since the pandemic, or maybe even before that, but mental health is a huge priority. And especially among, you said the Gen Zers, right? It's it's a huge priority. See, when I was
yeah,
working, I guess I would qualify as Gen X probably. So, mental health was not a big deal. You just, carried on. You don't want to, appear weak. You don't want to appear self-indulgent. So you just say that,
right.
you can't come into work and, say that, look, I'm feeling a little depressed, so I'm not coming in, or I'm not feeling good, so I'm going home, I'm staying home. But these days, even me actually, I prioritize mental health now. So, because workplaces have become more toxic, more demanding, and more than the work, the focus is more on how many hours you're putting in at work, right? I mean, the
Mhm.
clocking in and clocking out rather than the quality of work. And like you mentioned in your book, it has to be fun. Work has to be fun. The workplace has to be fun. So the fun quotient is going down. So yeah, I completely agree. Uh,
Yeah,
yeah. So
there's
what do
there's
you, yeah. So how would you describe a toxic workplace? Or, you were saying something, I think. Yeah.
well, sacrifice. The word sacrifice is a critical word. There are cultures of sacrifice where you're expected to sacrifice your personal and leisure time for the company. You're expected to take phone calls throughout the evening and the weekend if need be. And there's been a revolt against this. And as Generation Z has confronted these kinds of expectations, this phenomenon of quiet quitting has happened. Are you familiar with that term,
Yes,
quiet?
yes, absolutely. Yeah. What you've mentioned as disengagement, quiet quitting is pretty much
Yeah.
that in today's times. Yeah.
It basically means uh, I'm going to give less effort. I'm not going to quit, but I'm going to give less effort, and I'm not going to agree to sacrifice my personal time. So a lot of employees have left for that reason.
Yeah. Or they're still at work. They've not left, but mentally they've checked out, I guess.
That's right.
Yeah.
And of course, the research from the Gallup organization shows that only about 35% of employees are fully engaged at work. And you have most of the rest are disengaged from one degree or another. And about 15 to 20% are actively disengaged, meaning they're angry about it and they are causing trouble in the organization. They are toxic. They are demotivating their coworkers.
Yeah. So, your book, and I think all your other books as well, three other books, they draw a lot from data, right? Like the first one, this was the second book, not the first one, Seven Hidden Reasons Employees Leave. It was based on 19,700 exit and current employee surveys conducted by Saratoga Institute from 1999 to 2003, right? So you come across in your work, right? You're consulting with organizations and you're a transition coach as well. So what do you think is the reason for disengagement or quiet quitting, as you call it?
Well, I think the problem begins at the senior leadership level. And you talk about mindsets, I know, in some of your research. And there are very distinctive mindsets that the best places to work have that the worst places to work do not have. And, one of those mindsets is, we'll just burn people out until they leave, you know, and it's a mindset of replacement as opposed to engagement and retention. So, and I confronted this in my 30s when I was beginning to do this type of work. Um, that it's what's called the burn and churn philosophy, and it really looks as employees as cannon fodder, so to speak. We'll accept a certain amount of turnover, and they get used to and they call it the cost of doing business. And they don't think about the cost of having disengaged workers as a cost, and the cost of refilling that position when someone leaves, because it's not just the cost of recruiting a new person and training that new person. It's the fact that it usually takes 5 to 6 months to get the person who is recruited to get to the same level of competence as the person who left. That's a generalization, but a lot of companies fail to recognize the ramping up time that is required. So a lot of companies just don't think a lot about these kinds of costs. They just turn people over, and they call it the cost of doing business. Whereas the employers of choice realize that treating people well produces a business advantage. So you
Absolutely.
have very distinctive difference in the mindset of senior leaders. Now, the Gallup organization has spent years reporting that the manager is the number one reason employees leave, the direct manager. What they fail to emphasize is that the managers take their cues from the people at the top who really establish the culture. about whether you care about your people as people or you don't.
Yeah, it's what we hear, the company culture. It all trickles down from the top, right? Whatever the culture is.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, but you have this tradition of the mindset of if the more we give to employees, the more they will take advantage. And it's
Yeah.
just the opposite of the more we give to employees, the more they will want to give back. And we found that to be true. I mean, one of the great examples I use is Costco is a large grocery and general merchandise chain in the United States, and the CEO was giving better benefits than most of his competing companies, and his board was complaining about it. And he told the board, "We're building a company for the long term here, not the next quarter, not the quarterly profits." And he spoke up against the board. But you talk to Costco employees, they rave about him. Now, he's retired, but they would always say, "We love him," you know, because of the way he cares about us and gives us better benefits than people at other companies. So it's just the long term view versus the short term view.
Yeah, it's absolutely a short-term view, and when you're, being so self-serving. But it's interesting what you said that it's the leadership that matters, right? So
Right.
the quality of leadership today is not great. I'm sure in America, in India, all over the world. And that is a real problem, right? Because, you have people who are incompetent or they're not willing to coach or train or, upskill their employees. A lot of things, not, giving in to demands for leave, etc. Right? So what do you think makes a good leader today? And what do you see around you? What are the challenges or, gaps in leadership that you see?
Well, I think the good leaders have usually have had a bad boss, and some of the best leaders I've spoken to tell me about having a bad boss early in their life, and they have resolved to never do the things the bad boss did. And it's amazing how often I find that as I talk to senior leaders who do tend to care and want to build an employer of choice. But empathy is the I think the distinguishing characteristic. Uh, the best leaders have empathy for the average worker.
Yeah,
You know,
emotional intelligence, we call it now.
I'm sorry,
I said emotional intelligence.
emotional
Yeah,
intelligence. That's right.
yeah,
That's right.
yeah,
But a lot of a lot of leaders in corporate life are good at meeting their getting results, but they still may be lacking in empathy. They don't necessarily treat people well. They get results in spite of the way they treat people. And so companies hang on to these sort of people. And there's one company that well, I I followed that used to have a bad manager identification program. Well, they were alert to which managers employees were complaining about or which managers had the highest turnover rates. And some of them were getting results in spite of it. So it comes down to a decision at the very highest level. Do you keep these people that are getting results or do you replace them? And the companies, the senior leaders that replace those types of managers are the ones who are able to build credibility among their workforce that, you know what, I think they do really do care about us. So, um, one of the things that some companies do is they have 360 feedback of their managers where the employees rate their manager. And more companies are doing this. More and more companies are doing engagement surveys that help them to find out where are the managers who have the lowest scores. And then they can take action with those people.
Yeah, that's interesting and much needed. I have been in meetings, where a what do you call it, a sales manager, sales manager is being berated because they didn't meet their targets, and employee turnover is very high. But in a lot of companies, you see that, but the leader stays, and the people under him keep changing. So it's like a revolving door, right? People keep coming in and going, but nobody really cares because, and maybe senior people don't come in so much, and it's the junior people who keep coming in, meeting targets, not meeting targets. But
Yeah.
tell me, so like you said, most companies don't care as long as the results are being brought in, right? But
Mhm.
why should they care? I mean, could you emphasize that a little more? Because, the leader stays and the people under him have to keep leaving, and some of them on anxiety medication and things like that. So, why should the company care about not retaining such a manager and, uh, maybe, inculcating values of empathy and emotional intelligence in such a case? Because the turnover is being met. It's all right, right?
Well, if you want to become a true employer of choice, then you have to treat people well. You have to show them that you care about their well-being. And training managers is a big piece of that, and um, a lot of companies have they don't do training of managers at all. They simply replace and promote and put people in who are new to being managers, and they think that they have to know more than the people they're supervising. And that leads to a lot of destructive behavior because they pretend to know more. And they put up a front that they're supposed to tell their employees everything that the employee is supposed to do, instead of recognizing that the employees probably know how to do everything that needs to be done, and that their job as a manager is to listen to what each of their team members like about their work and what they need, because every team member is a little bit different. And one of the things I recommend is an engagement discussion that should happen at least monthly, preferably weekly, a check-in discussion with each of the team members saying, I just want you to know I value you. I appreciate your contributions. I want you to stick around. And I just want you to know how you're feeling about things right now. What could be better? How could we make this a better team and a better workplace? So I've created a 2-page guide with about 15 questions to ask the employee during one of these meetings. And coming out of that meeting, there should be some kind of an agreement of something the manager will do to support this employee, but also something the employee will do to create their own conditions for success and continue to be engaged. Now, not every situation can be resolved, but at least it shows goodwill in trying to create a better place to work. So that is the bottom line recommendation to most of the work that I do, that these engagement discussions begin to happen with each team member. But it's foreign to most managers. They're not used to the idea of allowing the employee to be sort of on an equal level of coming to an agreement about how we need to partner in your future success. So that's a big change, but I've created tools for that to happen. Each employee may be potentially vulnerable to leave for a different reason. Because one employee cares more about career advancement, and the next employee cares more about work-life balance, and the next employee just wants to use the skills that they have. So I would say most managers are a little bit unclear about what is most important to each of their team members. So, I've written about the 7 hidden reasons employees leave, but reason number 1 for one employee may be different for another employee who might leave for reason number 4. So it's important to know the 7 reasons, but it's even more important to know which reason would be the one that each team member might leave for.
So you're saying that, with it may change, things may change because you're saying that, employees are also reviewing their managers, right? Their superiors. And you think maybe with the Gen Z, we're all looking with great hope at the Gen Zers now. So you think there is a change coming?
In what way?
In maybe better, as you said that, more employee engagement, sitting down with people, asking them what they need to change, how they work, what their workplace to look like, if they're struggling at work, how, what kind of support they need, things like that.
Well, I think you'll have a reaction against that. Some managers will say, "No way, I'm not gonna baby these employees. They're unrealistic. They've had their faces in screens most of their life. They're awkward and uncomfortable dealing face to face with people. So there's a lot of pushback among managers right now as well. So I do think that companies need to recognize that Gen Zs are different, because of the way they grew up. And, they're more about data and looking at their phones and, not, I've heard a lot of complaints from managers that they're awkward in dealing in a social situation, like with a customer.
Yeah, I
Some
can understand
managers,
that. Yeah.
yeah, some managers are afraid to put them face to face with the customer for that reason. So, there needs to be a discussion about that, an honest discussion. I used to train companies about the differences in the generations. And there's a lot of finger pointing and blaming or dismissing. The traditional people dismissed a lot of the boomers. The boomers dismissed a lot of the Xers and millennials because they weren't like me. The workplace changed, but the mindset didn't change. They should have to go through the same things I had to go through.
Very true, because I've caught myself saying that to somebody, oh, we worked all night, all day. Why can't you do it? And I've heard myself say that and I realize, oh, that's so wrong, like a little later. So, it's very interesting what you're saying, Lee, that, you worked on this subject. So could you maybe, give us a difference according to you between Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z? How is the approach different?
Well, there was a big difference between the traditional types who were born before 1946. They were the ones that were willing to sacrifice their personal life. They had gone through the Depression. They knew what it was like to sacrifice. And then the baby boomers came along, and it was about self-fulfillment, and so they thought the baby boomers were spoiled, and were so concerned about their individual needs that they weren't thinking about the organization. They weren't thinking about the community as a whole. And so there was there were a lot of selfish boomers looking for their own satisfaction in the workplace. Very idealistic, unrealistic to a large degree. And then the Xers came along, very independent for the most part. Latchkey kids who had grown up with boomer parents who were working too long, and sometimes traditional parents. And they and millennials watched as their parents were fired, terminated, let go during the 80s and 90s. There was a lot of, I worked in the outplacement field as a job search coach with executives who had lost their jobs. And they had sacrificed for years, working long hours and weekends and traveling because the company wanted them to relocate. And their children watched all this happen, and they said, we don't want that. We don't want that. So Xers and millennials became very disillusioned with what they saw in the modern workplace. And they want more than that. They're more independent. They're more likely to want to go into business for themselves. So we've seen a lot of that. But the companies that are doing better with mixing the generations are the ones that have open discussion about their differences. That do bring a consultant in and talk about these are the general traits of each one. And you sit a boomer down and you talk with a millennial, and they ask each other the one question: what is one thing about you that's very different than the stereotype about your generation? And that's a healthy discussion. But in my research on diversity, the more diversity in an organization, the more likely their engagement scores are going to be lower. And the reason for that is that most diverse, well, this as far as age is concerned. I didn't look at it in terms of male, female, gender, or anything like that. But when you have a almost equal division of the generations in the workplace, there's so many differences that there's reason for conflict, and conflict happens, which reduces your engagement unless you're training people how to deal with differences and how to deal with conflict. And most companies don't do that. They don't train on how to deal with differences. So there's been a reaction against diversity in the United States, partly because of this. Some of these diversity initiatives that companies have undertaken have failed because they didn't manage the diversity and train their employees in how to deal with these differences, how to understand each other. So it's very unfortunate that that's happened.
Yeah, a good idea, but people need training. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about Gen Zers? How do you see them? They get a lot of flack for being, basically flaky, I guess, for lack of a better word. They want their
Flaky.
weekends. They don't want to work hard. That's what you hear, right? Huh? They can quit at a moment's notice. I mean, that's the stereotype, right? So, what do you see?
Well, that's a big part of it. Yeah, they're just seen as naive and cloistered with their computers, um, and awkward in social situations. Those are the most common things that other generations see. But they need to be properly onboarded. They need to be given instructions on how they are seen and feedback about it. Um, but there tremendous variation in each generation. Not every not every Generation Z individual is fits the stereotype.
Absolutely. I just love the question that, a boomer comes in and a millennial comes in and you ask each other, how do you not fit the stereotype? That's such a lovely question, really, and a wonderful conversation starter.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But do you want to talk about the reasons employees leave?
Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I analyzed the data of 20 plus thousand exit interviews. I had 19,000. And then for my next edition of the book, which came out in 2012, I did another 1,000 surveys from my website about people who had left companies responding why they left. Um, the the process of leaving is very different. It's not just the reason they leave. It's how they go about leaving. You know, there's usually something happens that is a triggering event that causes the person, whether it happens in the first week on the job or 6 months into the job, but something that happens that makes them think this I'm in the wrong place. But they don't necessarily quit at that moment. They stay until they decided to look for another job, uh, or maybe they start looking, but very passively, and then finally they leave. So there's this period of time between the shocking triggering event and the decision to leave, and then the actual leaving. And during that time, the employees can be re-engaged. That's something a lot of managers don't think about, because
Sure.
every manager needs to be mindful of the fact that if you've got 6 employees, there are probably 3 of them that are thinking about leaving. And you don't want to be shocked when they finally do. You want to engage them in a discussion and find out why they might leave. And that's how we get back to the re-engagement discussion. But I would say the number one reason employees leave is the culture, and the culture is, generated at the top, as we said. Does my senior leader care about me as a person? And when they see behavior that indicates that they don't, that's when they begin to think about leaving. Um, the other the other employee well-being is another main reason. Can I do my job but also leave when I've got a personal situation, or my child has a baseball game to go to? Um, do the benefits meet my needs? If something were to happen to me, I get sick, would the company have a compassionate attitude about me taking work off? There's a company that provides a parking space that's more convenient to people who are going through chemotherapy, for example, for cancer, things like that. Uh, so employee well-being is one of the top reasons right now. Are they compassionate about allowing me time to do family things, and raise my children, as opposed to demanding that I take this phone call, on a Saturday night, and so forth. Career advancement is a big one. Which of your people care most about advancing? Most people want to advance, but some people want to continue to do the job they have without having to manage people. I once had a manager who wanted to promote me into his position as a manager, which he thought he was doing me a big favor, but it wasn't what I wanted to do. And, we talk about the golden rule. There's also the platinum rule, which means, doing unto others as they would like to have be done unto. So you assume everybody wants what you want, but that's not necessarily the case. So understanding who of your people are most focused on career advancement and promotions and so forth, that's a big piece of it. So there are 7 of these reasons, and I would recommend managers read the book, thoroughly absorb, what it means to have differences among your team about which one is the most important, and go from there.
Yeah, thank you for giving us that in detail. I'm sure it'll help listeners as well. And yes, people must read the book. I have gone through it, and you've really listed it out very logically. And I'm happy to see that some of it still holds true.
My co-author, I wrote a book called Re-Engage with a co-author who was a former
Yeah.
colleague of mine, Mark Hirschfeld. And he called me and he said, what if we wrote a book where we took the 7 reasons employees leave and looked through the other end of the telescope from the standpoint of the job seeker? And that's what we did. We wrote a book that we have released just in the last year called Don't Take That Job Till You Read This Book. And basically, the idea is for employees to look at the 7 reasons employees leave in general and to think about which one is most important to them, and to use it as a lens for looking at their next employer, and to ask the right questions as they research the organization before going to work there, and to ask the right questions in job interviews, and preferably before you talk not just to your future manager, but to your future teammates, and ask the manager, could I meet some of the people I would be working with? Because chances are they're going to give you a more honest, fuller picture of what it's like to work there.
Yeah. That's great. And, going back to your book, Re-Engage, right? You said that even between becoming disengaged and actually quitting, companies can re-engage you. So I just want to mention that that's your book, right? How
That's
Re-Engage, how
right.
America's best places to work inspire extra effort in extraordinary times. And
Yeah,
yeah.
we have an organization called Quantum Workplace, who was affiliated with my former employer, and the engagement survey I created for that company, Right Management, was incorporated at Quantum Research and used as the best place to work competition. We have 44 business journals in cities around the United States. And each year, those business journals do a best place to work competition. And they give the survey to any company who wants to be in that competition, and every employee in those companies completes that survey. And the book that we wrote called Re-Engage was based on 2.1 million surveys that that were completed in those competitions. And the universal drivers of engagement were the opposite of the 7 hidden reasons employees leave. In other words, there's almost a one-to-one correlation between the reasons employees leave and the reasons they stay. I mean, just it's the mirror image, in other words.
Yeah, which makes sense. Yeah. And
Yeah,
your last book, you said, don't take this job till you take that job till you read this book, right? That's what it is. Have I got it right?
that's right.
Yeah.
And there are 9 lenses that the we ask the reader to look through before they take their next job. The
I
problem is,
want to know
oh,
what are some of these questions that you ask your network, your future peers in that company? What are some of these questions that people should be asking? Since you're also a transition career coach, people come to you. So what are the things
yes.
that, one should be asking for?
Well, we recommend that people get on LinkedIn and research the histories of people on LinkedIn. You can look at their career histories and you can network your way to people who have worked for the company that you're interested in. And you can get an introduction to those people and you can ask them what it was like to work there. Now, chances are that if you talk to enough people in your own network and you tell them who your target companies are and show them a list of your target companies, most people will say, "Oh, I know somebody there," or "I know somebody who knows somebody there." And you can network your way to people who have lived and worked in that culture and can tell you what it's like there. You can also go to Glassdoor. Are you familiar with Glassdoor?
Yeah.
Well, you can find out a lot just from employees' comments on Glassdoor. Um, but when you're in the interview, it pays to ask to speak to people other than the manager. It pays to ask the manager, what is your uh, what would you consider your management style to be? Um, can you give me an example of someone who's been promoted really fast in your department? Can you give me an example of how what your practices are as far as um, employee well-being and benefits? There are a lot of very pointed questions that
Yeah, but
we
in India, managers have huge egos. So they're not
they
going
have
to,
what?
they have huge egos. So they're not going to like being asked all these questions. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
That's true here as well. So you have to ask it in the right way, um,
Yeah. The smart
and you
way.
can and you have to know when too many questions is enough. You know, if you ask too many questions, you can get a negative reaction.
Yeah. But I think the LinkedIn idea is a great one. You reach out and connect with past employees and ask them about the culture.
Mhm.
Yeah. I think,
There's a premium version of LinkedIn that costs a little more, but you can do so much more with it. You can find secondary and tertiary, you know, referrals that way. So, and reading your local business journal, helps quite a bit as well.
yeah. So basically, we should be picking our next job, right? And a lot of my friends are doing that. They're saying that, instead of like we are rejecting companies now if it doesn't tick all the right boxes. So that's happening. You mentioned it in one of your interviews, and that's actually very true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, part of my mission in life is to put more pressure on companies to be better places to work. And if individual people do enough of that, and start, rejecting companies based on their reputations, I think that could have an effect.
Yeah, absolutely. Leigh, would you like to add anything? I think we've taken a lot of your time already. Would you like to add anything or any message for employees and employers, maybe?
Well, I think the big message here is communicate more, you know, uh, have more frequent discussions,
Yeah.
ask for more time. If you're an employee and you're not getting enough feedback, ask for more feedback. People get intimidated by the manager, and don't use the power that should be theirs. So when in doubt, over communicate.
That's a great one. And don't lose the power.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Leigh, for doing this.
That was my pleasure.